Marcus Aurelius did not write his thoughts for the world. He wrote them at night, in silence, often exhausted, often uncertain, not as an emperor but as a man trying to stay steady while everything around him moved. Tonight you don't need to understand his philosophy. You don't need to analyze his ideas. You don't need to hold on to anything at all. Just imagine him sitting nearby, not to teach, not to instruct, but simply to keep quiet company as the day slowly releases its grip on you. Marcus believed that rest was not weakness, it was preparation, a way to return to what is simple, calm, and within your control. As your body begins to settle, allow your thoughts to loosen their structure. There is nothing to solve tonight, nothing to fix, nothing to master, only this moment, this quiet presence, and the gentle unfolding of thoughts while waiting to sleep. The discipline of doing nothing. We are going to attempt the most fundamental contradiction of the modern human condition. We are here to talk about finding profound rest. But the true insight does not come from the act of sleeping, but from the mastery of wakefulness right up until the final moment of surrender. This session is not a sleep aid designed to knock you out. It is a mental compass designed to guide your consciousness to the borderlands of peace. As your body sinks heavy into the mattress, allow your mind to drift toward clarity. We are not forcing the cessation of thought. We are observing the strange, aggressive friction that prevents silence from happening naturally. What if the most radical, powerful act of self-control is not to achieve more, but simply to allow less? Can you truly yield the frantic control you cling to, even now as you lie here suspended between the day that was and the oblivion of the night ahead? The first lesson, the foundational pillar upon which all genuine rest is built, is the discipline of doing nothing. You might be fighting something right now, a persistent memory, a looping anxiety, the sheer obligation to get proper rest. But what exactly are you fighting? Is it the silence, the pause, or perhaps the sheer, unvarnished terror of being when you are accustomed to doing? This is the central paradox of rest. The ancient thinkers, particularly the Stoics who inspired Marcus Aurelius, understood that peace is not achieved by finding a quiet environment, but by the far more difficult process of becoming that quiet environment. Now, we define doing nothing here not as mere idleness or laziness, but as the active, intentional cultivation of stillness. It is the conscious and deliberate refusal to engage with the internal chaos that arises the moment you stop external motion. To grasp this discipline, conduct a small mental experiment. Imagine for a moment that your mind is the sole gatekeeper at the edge of a vast, walled city. All night long, thoughts, urgent messages, anxieties dressed up as profound responsibilities, urgent emails translated into internal monologue, arrive demanding entrance. The discipline of doing nothing is not about violently locking the gate or fighting the messengers. It is about recognizing that your fundamental job is not to process the mail or to interrogate the messengers or even to deny them entry. Your job, and your only job, it is merely to observe the messengers arriving and departing without inviting them in for coffee, offering them advice, or following them down the road. The conflict arises because institutionally and culturally, we equate human value with action. We are trained to believe that if we stop moving, we stop existing, or worse, we become vulnerable to the unresolved problems lurking just beneath the surface of our busy lives. This cultural conditioning creates the primary internal tension as you lie here. The harder you try to relax, the tenser you become. Relaxation, for the modern mind, has been tragically mistaken for a task to be completed, guaranteeing failure before you even begin. True, profound stillness demands the abandonment of the goal itself. Yet you cannot successfully do nothing if your mind is obsessed with the achievement of being nothing. In our hyper-productive society, doing nothing is often perceived as an insult, a moral failing, the definition of wasted potential. Our devices, our calendars, our social feeds, they all scream that you must optimize every single millisecond. Even the crucial biological necessity of sleep is treated as a performance metric to be tracked and analyzed. We lie down and immediately our brain begins an inventory of all the things we should be doing, all the ways we could be improving, mistaking internal noise for profound, inescapable responsibility. This discipline offers a path away from that tyranny. What changes when you embrace it is the fundamental relationship between you and your thoughts. You begin to realize, with soft, dawning clarity, that you are not the stream of panic, the torrent of worry, or the urgent call of the to-do list. You are, rather, the silent, observing shore against which the stream breaks. The discipline allows the mind to empty not through intellectual force or forced suppression, but simply through neglect. When you stop responding to and feeding the urgent thoughts, when you refuse the engagement, they lose their urgency, they exhaust their own energy, they fade into the background, revealing the vast, quiet undercurrent of calm that was, philosophically speaking, always there, buried beneath the noise. You do not earn rest through maximum exhaustion. You reveal rest through complete acceptance. Let the messengers pass. Silence that shouts, internal noise, the spectatorship of the mind, the art of non-participation. You lie there, suspended, waiting for the physiological surrender that defines the shift from consciousness to rest. But it is not the light or the temperature or the residue of caffeine that truly holds you hostage. It is the persistent, demanding traffic report running inside your skull, the relentless internal noise that becomes amplified only when the external world finally falls quiet. This is the paradoxical suffering of sleeplessness. The silence outside begins to shout inside. The ancient philosophers, especially those who found solace in the hard clarity of Stoicism, understood this struggle intimately. They called these mental inputs phantasiae, mere impressions, mental images, or narratives. They didn't see your thoughts as definitive truths, or as the core essence of who you are, but rather as events happening to you, like weather systems passing through. Marcus Aurelius taught us the necessary distance. The mind is the stage, yes, but you don't have to be every actor performing upon it, nor the critic reviewing the show. The deepest form of silence you can achieve is not the absence of sound outside. It is the deliberate refusal to amplify the sound within. To grasp this discipline, imagine your mind not as a pristine, quiet library waiting for your arrival, but as a vast, chaotic public square, a Roman forum, if you like, just before dawn. Peddlers are setting up their temporary shops. Politicians are shouting conflicting, urgent rhetoric, and debtors are wailing over yesterday's losses. The air is thick with demands and unfinished business. You are the custodian, the solitary observer, standing silently at the very edge of the piazza. The noise exists, the chaos is undeniable, but your obligation is not to silence the crowd. Your sole responsibility is simply to decline to buy anything they are selling and to refuse to step into the fray. Here is the central tension of the sleepless night, the desperate act of trying to sleep, which is fundamentally an act of intense, controlling exertion. You feel the anxiety rise and you resist the noise, believing that effort will achieve stillness. But the noise resists back, harder, because resistance validates its existence. This cyclical resistance is the true mechanism of your sleepless suffering. The moment you judge a thought, this is stupid, this worry is preventing sleep, I must stop thinking about that email. You climb down from your custodial perch and join the brawl in the forum. You stop being the observer and start being one of the panicked participants. The paradox is severe. The greatest mental discipline required for true rest is the discipline of allowing the noise to exist without giving it the currency of your attention or emotional investment. This spectatorship is perhaps the most difficult discipline to master in the modern age. We are trained by digital rhythm and corporate culture to multitask, optimize, and solve problems instantly. When you lie down, your highly trained brain treats the darkness not as a canvas for rest, but as an empty inbox, filling it immediately with unresolved tasks, future anxieties, and painfully vivid reconstructions of awkward conversations from 3 years ago. We mistake mental movement for actual mental work. We cling to the misguided belief that if we stop thinking about the problem, we must surely stop caring about the problem, confusing rumination with responsibility. Aurelius whispers, across 2 millennia, let it go. Not because the problem is trivial or irrelevant in the daylight, but because the darkness of the night, Your brief time of necessary biological repair is definitively not the workshop. What shifts within the core of your being when you successfully achieve this stoic distance? You realize that your fundamental self, the core you that seeks rest and inner peace, is utterly invulnerable to the content of your thoughts. Oh, anxiety is just thinking that has mistaken itself for a prophecy of the future. Worry is nothing more than a fiction, a story you continue to tell yourself, and like any narrative, it only has power if you voluntarily agree to sit down and listen to the whole performance every single night. By simply observing, not judging, not correcting, not even trying to pause the internal broadcast, you reclaim your emotional sovereignty. The internal noise is downgraded. It becomes ambient sound, background static, the chatter of a distant, insignificant radio station. You are the sky, boundless and unwavering, and your thoughts are merely the clouds, the changing weather systems passing through. So let the internal market trade its wares. Let the old memories flicker across the ceiling of your closed eyes. Your only job now is to be the sentinel, resting calmly at the edge of the square. The thoughts are not you. They are just echoes in the hollow chamber of the night, incapable of motion unless you invite them forward. The silence you seek is not found in the cessation of all noise, but in the radical and profound refusal to be moved by the sound. Waking up to the quiet death of midnight, the inertia of the soul, the paradox of necessary delay. You are lying there perfectly still, a sculpture of temporary surrender, yet internally, your consciousness is sprinting away from something you desperately want. You want sleep, but every fiber of your anticipating mind is focused on tomorrow or the day after. What if the decision you refuse to make right now is the only thing keeping your eyes open? We often misunderstand the true purpose of the sleepless night. It is not always about physical discomfort or simple neurological wakefulness. Sometimes the inability to sleep is the universe's way of holding you accountable, a silent, unblinking witness to your unresolved self. And midnight is the hour when the noise of the day dies and the truth of your own intentions becomes deafening. This is the quiet death of midnight, the moment when the convenient lies we tell ourselves about our potential finally dissolve. Philosophically, sleep is not merely rest. It is a temporary reprieve from existential duty. It is the period we grant ourselves to drop the burden of self-creation, to let the narrative pause. But what happens when the narrative refuses to pause? Consider the metaphor of the anchor chain. You are not tied to the past, the things you regret you said, nor are you always tied to the overwhelming breadth of the present moment. Most often, the chain preventing you from dropping anchor is tethered to the idea of the immediate future. It is the 8 a.m. meeting you haven't truly prepared for, the difficult conversation you've delayed for 3 weeks, the overdue action that defines a shift in your life trajectory. This chain is invisible, made entirely of intention without action, and it is far stronger than any physical mooring. This is the tyranny of the immediate future, where the abstract anticipation of effort carries greater weight than the effort itself. The deeper paradox of the sleepless night is that you know exactly what needs to be done, but you refuse to execute the first tiny step, thereby guaranteeing a state of continuous, low-grade internal labor. We delay action in the daylight, rationalizing it as efficient energy management. We think, I will save my focus for tomorrow morning when I am fresh. But the human mind is fundamentally incapable of truly saving energy when the task is critical. Instead of saving effort, you merely externalize the effort onto your subconscious, which then spends the entire night running simulations and stress testing solutions. The cognitive load of the delayed action consumes exponentially more energy lying here, under the covers, than the actual completion of the action ever would. You are actively choosing anxiety over effort. This is the great clash that defines the sleepless hours, the primal need for absolute physical rest, colliding head-on with the awareness that I should be doing something right now, a demand generated by an internalized productivity culture that dictates the self must always be optimized, even in silence. The mind runs this debilitating loop. I can't sleep because I have X to do, but I can't do X because I need sleep to execute it well. The way out, as Marcus Aurelius might observe, is not in fighting the thought, but in observing the mechanism. True rest is not the absence of activity, It is the completion or acceptance of duty. If you cannot complete the duty now, you must achieve philosophical acceptance of your temporary inadequacy. Observe the anxiety, notice the weight of the phantom chain, but refuse to tug on it. It is merely a projection of tomorrow's self onto tonight's stillness. Remember this, the anxiety haunting your midnight is harmless. It cannot touch the reality of the morning. You can acknowledge the presence of the 8 a.m. meeting, the overdue email, or the difficult choice, and simultaneously declare, I will carry that burden, but not this instant. Allow the chain to go slack, not because the duty is forgotten, but because the strength to lift it requires the stillness of this specific, irreplaceable hour. You cannot solve tomorrow tonight. You can only rest. Let the necessary delay settle. The sun will rise on the strength you claim back now. Most minds drift away before reaching this point. But you're still here. Leave your like so I'll know your mind didn't wander. The tyranny of trying to sleep, the effort of effortlessness. You are exhausted. Every fiber of your being is calling for the cessation of the day, demanding the soft, velvet blanket of unconsciousness. But here you lie, suspended in the deep, silent trough between wakefulness and surrender. The lights are off, the room is cool, the world is muted, yet the essential condition for rest remains elusive. You want sleep. You need sleep. But when the demand for rest becomes an active effort, when the desire for slumber is expressed as a will, why does that desire become the very engine keeping you awake? This is the great nocturnal paradox, the counterproductive effort. We encounter this dilemma frequently in life. The harder we try to remember a name, the farther it retreats. The harder we try to relax, the more rigid we become. But in the context of sleep, this mechanism achieves tyranny. Sleep, after all, is not something you do. It is something you allow. It is a state of being utterly surrendered, and any act of volition, any measurement, any demand, however quiet, is a rejection of that surrender. Marcus Aurelius would categorize the arrival of sleep as an external. It is indifferent to your wishes, impervious to your schedules, your health and your actions, those you control. The moment of collapse into deep sleep that is beyond your immediate command. We are not meant to command the river of sleep to flow faster. We are meant only to sit quietly on the bank, observing the passage of the night, until we are, without warning or effort, gently swept up. The anxious watcher, the internal accountant logging every passing minute, finds himself rigid and resistant, unable to be moved. Consider this internal dynamic. You close your eyes and immediately initiate a monitoring process. Am I sleeping yet? How much time has passed? If I don't fall asleep in the next 15 minutes, tomorrow will be ruined. This internal dialogue, this surveillance of failure, is precisely the opposite of what the body needs. Trying to sleep is functionally doing something. It involves the activation of the prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, planning, and stress analysis. The very instrument required for surrender, the mind, is weaponizing itself against rest. We have manufactured what can only be called sleep anxiety, the fear of not successfully performing the mandatory biological function. We treat sleep like a task to be checked off, a performance to be optimized and quantified. As we have successfully industrialized our rest, and so the attempt to maximize rest results in maximum wakefulness. The effort is the poison. The harder you try to relax, the more you are acknowledging and reinforcing the very tension you wish to dispel. The realization required here is one of profound release. True rest does not begin when the body stops moving. It begins when the mind stops willing. The tyranny of trying is the belief that you can force a natural process that requires permission, not force. The Stoic insight reminds us, you cannot control the outcome, sleep, but you can control your ascent to the waiting. You can choose to release the expectation that you must be asleep by a certain hour. Shift your focus entirely. Instead of trying to make yourself sleep, observe the fact that you are awake. Accept the vigilance. And accept the delay. Become interested, not frustrated. If your mind insists on working, give it something small, gentle, and utterly irrelevant to the clock. Focus on the sensation of breathing. Feel the weight of your limbs, not as a demand for rest, but as a neutral physical fact. You are not failing to sleep, you are succeeding at waiting. The weight of the world and the weight of your exhaustion is momentarily released the moment you truly stop performing. You are not defined by the minutes you lose, but by the peace you cultivate in the interim. Sleep does not answer commands, schedules, or demands. It answers quiet permission. The goal is not sleep itself, but the acceptance of the waiting, the surrender to the indifference of the hour. The true work of the night is learning to be undone. Finding freedom in fixed constraints. Welcome back to the stillness. Tonight, we are going to contemplate a deeply counterintuitive truth, one that Marcus Aurelius turned over and over in his mind while the empire raged outside his tent: the liberating cage, the art of willing constraint. Why do we fight the very walls that define our path? Settle into that realization. Allow the quiet gravity of the room to pull your awareness downward, away from the struggle, toward the floor beneath you. Tonight, we explore the strange, profound comfort found when you finally stop trying to move the mountains and start navigating the valley that is your life, precisely as it is. The primary field of Stoic freedom is not the external world, but the internal recognition of necessary limits. And life is structured by non-negotiables: gravity, time, the past, the personalities of others, the current state of your own biology. To the Stoics, these constraints are not unfortunate accidents. They are the raw material of meaning, the foundation upon which true strength is built. Freedom, therefore, is not the chaotic act of breaking these fixed rules, but the rational choice of your attitude within them. It is recognizing that the most potent power you possess is the power to choose what you value and how you respond, even when the stage upon which you act is rigidly set. Consider the metaphor of the sculptor and the marble block. When an artist approaches the uncarved stone, they are not free to imagine a flowing river made of air. Their art is entirely constrained by the block's physical reality, its grain, its density, and the exact location of its natural flaws. If the sculptor ignores these constraints, the stone breaks. True artistic freedom lies in deep respect for the limitations of the medium. The sculptor must work with the inherent immutability of the marble to reveal the form already imprisoned within. The constraints do not limit the art, they enable it. Your life, your circumstance, your body, these are your marble blocks. What art are you trying to carve out of defiance? And what magnificent form might emerge if you chose alignment instead? Here is where the psychological mechanism of the paradox reveals itself. We spend the vast majority of our mental energy resisting the fixed things. We resist the fact that the meeting is at 9 a.m., that the weather is cold, that the relationship ended, that we are aging. This resistance is the source of all suffering because it is energy aimed at an impenetrable wall. We feel trapped because we are continuously trying to shatter a cage made of reality itself. The profound insight offered by Aurelius is this: when we internalize the constraint, when we will the necessary limitation, the fight ends. You cease to be a prisoner of circumstance and become a voluntary participant in necessity. This is the difference between being chained and choosing to walk the length of the chain. The conflict shifts entirely from external struggle to internal alignment. You are no longer asking, "Why must this be?" but rather, "Given that this is, how shall I best employ my will?" You trade the heavy burden of trying to change the world for the clarifying lightness of changing your own mind. Now, bring this concept directly into the constraints of your present moment. Perhaps it is the unavoidable noise outside the window, the chronic pain in your back, the financial limit you cannot surpass this month, or simply the biological necessity of needing sleep when your mind insists on review. Stop viewing the traffic jam of thoughts or the unavoidable limitation as an obstacle to happiness. View it as the specific, perfectly fitted frame that forces focus. It is the crucible built precisely for forging your patience and testing your acceptance. When you define the boundaries of your power, you stop wasting precious energy on the infinite, uncontrollable variables outside those lines. What changes inside you when you embrace the constraint? Your emotional calculus flips. Resistance breeds anxiety. Acceptance breeds immediate, quiet sovereignty. You gain clarity, you conserve energy, and you achieve a deep, restful calm. You become the ruler of a very small, well-defined kingdom, your own mind and the way you process the inevitable. In this willing constraint, you find a freedom that the chaotic external world can never threaten, a deep and unassailable peace. Freedom is not the absence of boundaries, it is the perfect alignment of your will with the boundaries. Rest now in the assurance that the limitations you perceive are exactly where your greatest strength lies, waiting to be found. The lightness of existence, the heavy lightness of existence. How is it that the very moment you realize your life is but a fleeting spark in cosmic infinity, you also feel the greatest imperative to live it well? Why does cosmic meaninglessness often grant us profound personal weight? This is the paradox of acceptance, the central riddle Marcus Aurelius wrestled with when he gazed at the turning stars and then looked back at the messy bureaucracy of his empire. The weight of existence, he understood, is not the burden placed upon you by the universe, but the responsibility you choose to internalize. The lightness is the profound relief derived from recognizing how little of the universe's operation is actually up to you. The ancients, observing the eternal processes of nature, formalized this tension by distinguishing between what they called the adiaphora, the indifferent things, the vast machinery of fate that doesn't care about your promotion, your deadlines, or your arguments, and the prohegumena, the preferred things, those elements that shape your character. Stoicism does not demand that you stop caring. It demands that you strictly redirect your care toward the only thing eternal about you, your intention. We must accept the crushing weight of the world's indifference, only to realize that indifference is precisely what grants us the supreme lightness of personal freedom. Imagine you are standing on the deck of a massive ocean liner sailing across an endless black sea. From the deck, you see the microscopic detail of the water splashing, the specific color of the horizon line, and the immediate challenges of keeping your footing. This specific detail feels immense, demanding all your focus. But if you step back and observe the entire ocean, you realize your vessel is one single speck, destined eventually to integrate back into the vastness. The paradox is this: while you cannot control the ocean, the one small area you can control, your specific cabin, your moral bearing, the direction of your gaze, is now magnified in importance precisely because the rest is uncontrollable. The absolute insignificance of the journey liberates the significance of your internal alignment in this very moment. The heaviness comes from the burden of internal responsibility. It is the realization that if nothing external truly matters in the grand cosmic ledger, then your internal choices, your reactions, your judgments, your character, carry the entire burden of creating meaning. Every decision about how you react, every flicker of temper contained, every act of kindness performed, these are the only true, lasting structures you build in the empty architecture of your soul. This is the heavy part. You are the sole architect of your inner world. But the lightness is the freedom from external expectation. The universe isn't watching. Your legacy is determined solely by your character, not by your impact on the GDP or the news cycle. You are relieved of the crushing pressure to save the world because your sole, magnificent task is simply to manage the 10 square feet of existence you inhabit, your own mind. In the modern age, we suffer profoundly from context fatigue. We are constantly bombarded with the scale of human suffering, ecological crisis, and political chaos, creating an overwhelming, paralyzing heaviness. We mistake awareness for obligation. The Stoic answer is not to ignore the world, but to correctly identify the boundary between the heavy things you can immediately influence, your ethics, your immediate kindness, your effort, and the light things you must release, global outcomes, the opinions of millions, the past. When you stop trying to hold the whole earth, the little piece you are responsible for becomes manageable, even joyful. The profound psychological impact of this perspective is the arrival of genuine quietude, of ataraxia. Tranquility is not found in a universe that promises eternal guarantees, but in a universe that demands nothing of you except your own honest, consistent moral effort. But when you embrace the lightness of cosmic indifference, you shed the anxiety that drives perfectionism, the constant comparison that fuels inadequacy, and the desperate striving for validation. You trade the futile pursuit of external control for the immediate and absolute authority over your inner landscape. You become a small, self-sufficient empire in the boundless void. Sleep now, knowing this. We find true strength not when we carry the weight of the cosmos on our shoulders, but when we choose to carry only the light, unwavering flame of our own present moment intention. Let the vastness of everything else simply drift away. The futility of tomorrow's anxiety, the great exhaustion of preemptive grief. Have you ever felt utterly drained by a disaster that never arrived? That heavy weight you carried throughout the day, that specific, visceral dread, only to realize when the clock struck midnight that you had been lifting shadows. We arrive at the concept of proleptic suffering, the psychological act of experiencing tomorrow's pain today. It is the definitive theft of the present moment committed by the rational mind, convinced that rehearsal is synonymous with preparation. In reality, it is merely the practice of sorrow. Marcus Aurelius speaks directly to this exhaustion when he reminds us that the pain we fear may never come, or if it does, it will not be as great as the anxiety preceding it. Anxiety creates an invoice for suffering and demands immediate payment long before the goods are delivered. It is the fundamental difference between planning, which is a calm assessment of variables within your control, and paralyzing, which is a frantic, cyclical obsession with variables entirely outside your control. One requires stillness, the other noise. Imagine yourself walking through a vast, endless landscape at noon. The path ahead is challenging, perhaps rough, but manageable if you maintain your rhythm. However, your mind has forced you to carry a backpack filled with stones, each one labeled with a fear that belongs to a future milepost. There is the stone labeled next week's rejection, the jagged one titled the potential illness, and the massive boulder labeled the financial crash. You are exhausted by evening, not from the effort of the actual walk, but from the unbearable weight of carrying problems that still belong to future paths, problems you have not yet encountered and may never encounter. The heat you feel is real, the blisters on your heels are real, but the overwhelming burden that breaks your stride is purely hypothetical, a shadow cast forward by an overzealous imagination. The profound paradox of anxiety is that we believe it is a form of control. We think if we visualize the worst outcome enough times, if we run the simulation of disaster perpetually in the background of our consciousness, we will somehow inoculate ourselves against its sting. But that inoculation is administered with poison. We suffer twice, once in the imagination, depleting our reserves, and potentially a second time in reality, finding ourselves spent and weak when true resilience is needed. The energy we spend today mourning losses that have not occurred is energy we are stealing from the future self who might genuinely need it to cope. We mistake the tension created by worrying for the power of preparation. How does this mechanism manifest now as you lie here waiting for rest? Perhaps you are reviewing a conversation from last Tuesday, fearing its consequence on Friday. Perhaps you are running complex, pointless calculations about the probability of failure 6 months from now. These anxieties do not offer solutions, they offer only noise. They are the psychic equivalent of compulsively checking your mailbox every hour for a letter that hasn't even been written yet, only to feel crushed each time the box is empty. Yet you are paying interest on a debt that has not been finalized. The profound philosophical shift comes when you realize that suffering is fundamentally localized. It only exists now. Future suffering is not suffering, it is anticipation. The moment of true pain has its own specific gravity, its own unique duration, and its own immediate demands. By refusing to suffer preemptively, you reclaim your emotional sovereignty. You accept that when tomorrow finally arrives, it will bring with it its own sufficiency, its own reserves of strength you do not yet possess. You stop loaning your emotional stability to a future self who may not even exist, or who, if they do exist, will be fundamentally different, hardened, changed, or simply distracted by the intervening passage of time. Do not rob your present peace for a tragedy that belongs only to the imagination. Tomorrow has not requested your worry, It demands only the commitment of the next breath, the next moment of calm surrender. Rest now. The only future you can truly manage is the one you are currently choosing to rest from. Art of allowing the day to endure, the radical acceptance of the liminal hour. Have you noticed how the hours between 2 and 4 a.m. seem to stretch not into minutes, but into whole, separate dimensions? This is when time stops being a river and becomes a stagnant pool you are forced to wade through. You are stuck between the exhaustion of the day you just finished and the dread of the day that is about to begin. This period, the duration of the wait, is what we must learn to endure, not by fighting it, but by allowing it. This is the art of allowing the day to endure. We often talk about Stoic patience, but tonight we address a more refined discipline, hypomone, the Greek term often translated as enduring constancy. It is not simply the passive act of waiting. It is the active commitment to maintain your rationality and composure not just during a sudden crisis, but during the slow, grinding stress of inaction. Tonight, the inaction is the inability to transition into sleep. We are trapped in the day's residue, resisting the quiet demand of the night. We believe this duration is failing us, when in reality, we are failing to accept its inherent nature, its slowness, its emptiness, its lack of immediate resolution. Imagine a vessel caught in the deepest hours of a raging sea storm. If the crew attempts to outrun the tempest, they expose the hull to unnecessary strain. The seasoned mariner doesn't try to defeat the storm. They deploy a sea anchor. This device does not propel the ship forward. It stabilizes the bow and creates intentional drag. And accepting the power of the wave and the inevitability of the slow, grinding pull, the ship allows the storm to spend its energy around it, finding safety not in speed but in disciplined resistance to movement. You are that vessel. The storm is not the external world, but the desperate churning of your own mind demanding a change in state, demanding sleep, demanding tomorrow. When you try to outrun the sleeplessness, you generate friction, strain, and anxiety. You are resisting the duration itself. The sea anchor in this context is the conscious decision to cease struggling for the outcome. It is the agreement to remain stable, present, and aware for the entire duration of the storm, no matter how long the hours stretch. The core mechanism of suffering in the liminal hour is the attachment to the next moment. We tell ourselves, "Oh, I must be asleep by 3:15 a.m." Or, "If I don't sleep now, tomorrow is ruined." We spend this quiet hour generating narratives of failure, the failure to rest, the failure to control the mind, the ultimate failure to produce an outcome we desire. But duration is not an action we take, it is an environment we inhabit. When you anchor yourself in the present reality, the simple, unvarnished fact of the darkness and the stillness, the resistance dissipates. You realize that you cannot control the clock, but you can control your acceptance of the clock's pace. In the metrics-driven reality of modern life, sleep has become the final, ultimate metric. It is the completion marker for a successful day. And when we lie here, awake, we feel we have failed the assignment. Allowing the day to endure means relinquishing the outcome metric. It means accepting that if this period lasts another hour or 4 hours, the discipline remains the same. Stable awareness, gentle self-correction back to the breath, and zero internal resistance to the passage of time. This shift moves us from a state of frantic panic and frustration to a state of neutral, observing presence. The profound psychological impact is the realization that the hardest thing to endure is often not intense pain, but the simple, unvarnished state of being present when you desperately wish you were absent. When you cease fighting the duration, the emotional temperature of the room drops. The fear associated with the wakefulness begins to recede because fear requires resistance to thrive. The day must be allowed to spend its lingering energy, and your resistance only feeds it. But the deepest tranquility does not arrive when you finally achieve sleep. The deepest tranquility arrives the moment you cease demanding it. You allow the day to endure, and in that grand permission, you grant yourself permission to simply be. So let the night run its course. Let the minutes unfold without your interference. There is great peace in the admission that, for now, you are merely enduring, and that is enough. On being a stranger in your own bed, The mattress is molded to your shape, the scent of the sheets utterly familiar. You are lying in the safest, most predictable physical space in your life, your own bed. Yet, as the minutes stretch and the hour slides toward the unforgiving dawn, you might be overwhelmed by a peculiar, deep-seated vertigo. The sensation that the architecture of your life, built meticulously brick by painstaking brick, is suddenly unrecognizable. This is the quiet dread known as the estrangement of the self, or the paradox of familiarity. It is the moment you realize that the person observing your thoughts, navigating your habits, and performing your days is not exactly the person you remember signing up to be. We mistakenly equate consistency with constancy. And we assume that because the name on the driver's license hasn't changed, the inhabitant of the skin must remain identical. But identity, the philosophers knew, is not a permanent monument. It is a river of continuous, subtle revision. You are, in every quiet moment, stepping into a completely different stream. Imagine returning to the house where you grew up after 20 years. You locate the key and turn the lock. The door is the same, the wallpaper pattern vaguely recognizable, but the scale is completely wrong. The hallways feel narrower, the ceilings lower, the emotional resonance warped and strange. You are physically in the space of your past, yet you are an enormous, complex adult guest, unable to fit back into the smaller frame of who you once were. The self is the only house you can never truly leave, and yet you constantly remodel it in the dark, often forgetting where you placed the new furniture or walled off the old windows. You are, in a very real sense, a temporary, highly conscious squatter in the mansion built by your earlier, less burdened self. The underlying conflict arises from our desperate attempt to maintain a fixed, easily definable narrative. We spend our daylight hours curating a specific profile, a set of expectations, accomplishments, and beliefs that others, and crucially we ourselves, can reliably depend on. But the world is an engine of constant revision, forcing adaptation whether we consent to it or not. Every decision you avoid, every fear you repress, every silence you keep, every compromise you silently accept, is a chisel taking a new, subtle shape to the sculpture of who you are becoming. Yet the fundamental tension that keeps you awake tonight is not between you and the external world. It is between the you promised to be and the you that circumstances and time have irrevocably forged. You look at your current routine, the way you interact with colleagues, the foods you now instinctively avoid, the silence you now prefer, the opinions you've quietly discarded, and a small, insistent voice whispers, "Who is this person? I don't remember agreeing to this routine." That voice is the stranger, and that stranger is simultaneously the most honest, updated version of you available. This internal misalignment, this feeling of self-alienation, is often the source of that low-grade, nagging restlessness that drives us to distraction. When you feel disconnected in your own bed, unable to settle, you are experiencing the psychological jet lag of having traveled too far, too fast from your foundational principles. Or perhaps you've simply forgotten that you possess the inherent right to inspect and renegotiate those principles. The deepest comfort is not achieving immediate self-recognition, but accepting that the self is inherently mysterious and always under radical construction. The Stoic response to this internal exile is not fear or panic, but a disciplined, steady curiosity. If you encounter a stranger, you do not immediately run. You observe their movements, their speech, their intent. You must extend that same rigorous, non-judgmental observation to the stranger living within your own skin tonight. Ask, what does this new iteration of me truly desire? What burdens has it shed? What errors has it learned to repeat? The greatest philosophical error is expecting permanence in a fluid, living system. The deepest freedom lies in recognizing that being a stranger in your own bed is not a symptom of failure or loss, but a powerful, necessary sign of organic growth. You are not lost. You are simply evolving beyond your old maps and outdated self-definitions. Lie still. Breathe into the soft, heavy silence of the room. Know that the most essential and intimate conversation you can have is not with the friend you've known for decades, but with the quiet stranger who shares your breathing and your name tonight. Welcome them home. How to be alone without being lonely. The necessary isolation. Differentiating solitude from loneliness. You are lying here now, perhaps surrounded by silence. Perhaps the sounds of the day have retreated, leaving only the soft hum of the night or the rhythmic sound of your own breath. But how much of that silence belongs to the world outside, and how much of it belongs to the relentless, ceaseless conversation still echoing inside your own mind? This is the crucial distinction we must observe while waiting for sleep. The great, unacknowledged fear isn't truly that you are physically alone, but that when the external noise finally stops, you might find that you do not like the company you are forced to keep, the company of yourself. Let's look at the simple, terrifying pivot point between merely being alone and descending into true corrosive loneliness. The great Stoic thinkers, from Epictetus teaching his students to endure hardship, to Marcus Aurelius writing in his tent on the battlefield, did not view solitude as a deprivation or a lack, but precisely as a resource. Solitude is, fundamentally, the state of being separated from others. It is purely geographical and physical. You can measure it by miles or empty rooms. Loneliness, however, is something far more volatile. Loneliness is the deep, cold state of feeling fundamentally separated from yourself, disconnected from your own core being and purpose. It is purely psychological and existential. Solitude is something you can choose and cultivate. Loneliness is something you endure, often against your will, even in a crowded space. And Aurelius constantly reminds himself in the Meditations to retreat not just away from the clamor of the court, but specifically into himself, finding the inner calm that external events cannot touch. He saw the mind as a citadel, a fortified place of safety, self-governance, and inherent peace. We often mistakenly equate this necessary, virtuous retreat with abandonment. To illustrate this difference, imagine two rooms. In the first room, there is a person physically alone, the lights dimmed, perhaps calmly reading or simply reflecting on the day's events. They are fully present in their own chosen isolation. They are in true solitude. Now imagine a second room, completely filled with people, loud music, celebration, and forced merriment. Yet one person stands in the corner, feeling utterly invisible, their thoughts racing in a tight, anxious loop of self-doubt and unattachment. They are profoundly, agonizingly lonely. Solitude is presence. It is the mindful, deliberate occupancy of your own space and time. Loneliness, paradoxically, is absence. It is the feeling that your own core self is missing from the equation, unavailable to provide comfort or clarity, even when surrounded by others. The body can be in the quiet safety of a bedroom. The mind can still be screaming for external validation, desperately searching for a connection it believes it cannot provide for itself. The mechanism that turns solitude sour, that converts potential peace into actual anguish, is simple. It is avoidance. We use the perpetual noise of modern life, the constant streaming light, the endless notifications, and the exhausting social obligations to avoid the confrontation with our own unresolved anxieties and unacknowledged fears. Loneliness is rarely caused by the lack of external company. It is terribly exacerbated by the internal refusal to sit down, look across the table, and genuinely befriend the person staring back at you in the quiet reflection. When you choose to sit in silence and your mind floods with the regrets of yesterday or the worries of tomorrow, the immediate painful impulse is to seek an escape route, usually through external distraction or temporary validation. This desperate escape reinforces the cycle, teaching you over and over again that your own company is fundamentally insufficient. The ultimate paradox of this dilemma is that only by fully engaging with the quiet, if sometimes uncomfortable discomfort of true isolation, can we cultivate the robust internal resources necessary to withstand the crushing weight of loneliness when it truly strikes. You must turn the spotlight inward, even if the shadows it reveals are long and unsettling. In the contemporary, hyper-connected world, we have managed to achieve a condition of maximum physical proximity coupled with maximum emotional distance. Our phones promise global connection but too often deliver only constant comparison, making us feel more isolated and inadequate than ever, even while connected to billions. To practice Aurelian solitude today means setting stern, deliberate boundaries on that external, manufactured noise. It means reclaiming a fixed, quiet period, not for demanding productivity but for simple, unfettered presence. And it means viewing the empty apartment or the silent walk not as a punishment inflicted by the world, but as a privileged, essential appointment with the only person whose existence is truly guaranteed to the end of your days: you. When you master this vital distinction between being alone and feeling lonely, the psychological and philosophical impact is nothing short of revolutionary. You become fundamentally immune to the fear of being left behind. Loneliness, when faced directly and integrated, transforms into unshakable autonomy and self-possession. You develop an inner landscape so rich, reliable, and interesting that others become wonderful complements to your life, rather than desperate crutches required for survival. This internal self-reliance is true freedom. Yet you internalize the profound lesson that the external world can never truly fill an internal void, only mask it temporarily, delaying the inevitable self-reckoning. The true work of the good life is excavating that inner citadel, dusting off your core virtues, and settling in for the long haul of self-governance. You cease desperately seeking external validation and instead begin calmly radiating internal peace. Find the profound comfort not in the temporary presence of others, but in the calm, unyielding certainty of yourself. Solitude is not an emptiness to be dreaded and filled, but a silence to be deeply heard. Listen closely. The greatest, most reliable company you will ever keep is waiting there, just beneath the surface of the noise. We're halfway through this journey. Maybe you've closed your eyes, but your mind is still learning. Subscribe now and stay with us for what's coming next. Waiting for dawn, living in the dark, the virtue of the interregnum. You are here, suspended. The clock ticks forward, though you are moving nowhere. You are waiting for the engine of the self to slow down, but the deep darkness has amplified the tireless hum of your own consciousness. When you are waiting for sleep, are you practicing patience, or are you simply enduring the sharp absence of resolution? This hour, this moment of stillness, demands that we confront the profound, yet deeply uncomfortable space of the in-between. The ancient world recognized various definitions of time. They had chronos, the measurable mechanical ticks that rule our schedules. They had kairos, the opportune, qualitative moment, the perfect instant for action. But there is a third, unnamed Stoic time that haunts us now, the interregnum, literally meaning the time between reigns. It is the psychological space between the decision and the outcome, the intention and the realization. It is the deep night before the sun is guaranteed. It is the profound moment when you know what you want to achieve, but have no control over the speed or certainty of its arrival. Marcus Aurelius, pacing the walls of his military camps during long, restless nights, understood this intimately. The legionary guard isn't just waiting for the relief watch, he is actively inhabiting the lack of light, testing his resilience against the temptation of despair or frantic, premature striving. This interregnum demands that we find our sustenance not in the promise of the coming dawn, but in the internal discipline to maintain equilibrium in the face of absolute temporal nothingness. The goal is not the relief of arrival, but how you choose to exist while utterly devoid of certainty. This is where the Stoic paradox hits its hardest. We are rigorously conditioned by the modern world to see waiting as a failure of speed, a lapse in efficiency, or a lack of personal control. The modern mind despises the interregnum because it demands resolution, immediate and total. But the philosophical perspective reverses the tension entirely. The waiting is not the pause before life begins. It is life, refined, stripped bare, and tested against the ultimate external force, time. The darkness isn't the failure of dawn. It is the raw, pure material where our true nature, our prohairesis, our moral will is tested. We don't get restless because the dawn hasn't arrived. We get restless because we haven't learned to trust the absolute necessity of the dark. We mistake the need for control for the need for certainty. Think about how this applies right now, in this moment of suspended rest. You are not failing at sleep, you are succeeding at stillness. The interregnum of the contemporary self is characterized by instant notifications, endless scrolling, and the desperate flight from the void, because the void demands self-confrontation. Your anxiety about tomorrow or your regret about yesterday flourishes in this transitional space only if you neglect the present moment's power. This uncomfortable waiting room of the mind is where you are forced to confront the true inert weight of things you cannot change, the external events, the passage of time. It's the inevitability of the slow grinding process. Accepting the interregnum shifts patience from a passive, seated virtue to an active, disciplined force. It's not just enduring, it is transforming the dark. When you fully occupy the space between the was and the will be, you achieve a psychological sovereignty that is unshakable. You realize that your internal happiness is not dependent on the arrival of the external dawn, but on your disciplined existence within the night. The true reward is not the relief of finally sleeping, but the integrity maintained during the quiet journey through the perceived absence. This state, this pure, dark existence, is where true character is forged. The dark does not guarantee the dawn, but the dark is the essential condition of its arrival. The only thing you are truly waiting for is the decision to accept that you are already precisely where you need to be. Be still. In the silence of the interregnum, find the deepest current of your unshakable sovereign self. The present moment as the only escape. We arrive now at the concept of the internal citadel, not just as a place of defense against the external world, but as the only viable exit strategy from internal chaos. This is the ultimate paradox of Stoicism, especially pertinent to sleepless hours. The only place you can truly escape to is the exact place where you must choose to remain. Do you feel trapped right now? Trapped between the regrets of yesterday and the crushing demands of tomorrow? This restlessness, this mental agitation, is the direct sensation of trying to outrun yourself. You are seeking release from the constraints of the clock, attempting to force a different reality, one where you are already rested, or where yesterday's mistake never occurred. But where exactly are you trying to go? What if the door you seek to run through is not an exit out, but a deliberate, decisive surrender in? Marcus Aurelius consistently urged us to regard the present moment, the nunc, not merely as a time marker, but as the entire operational reality of the self. Everything that has happened is now memory, an internal construction subject to revision and bias. Everything that will happen is merely anticipation, a possibility built upon hope and fear. The only ground you truly stand upon, the only space where fate grants you sovereign power, is the exact slice of time passing through you right now. This moment is small, yes, but its containment is what makes it perfect. When you accept its boundaries, you define the limits of your responsibility. Imagine yourself not as a person attempting to navigate a vast, choppy ocean, but as the anchor itself. When you attempt to escape the present, your mind becomes a ship pulled violently by the high winds of the past, which often manifest as guilt or rumination, and the unpredictable tides of the future, which manifest as anxiety and planning. You are dragged, resisting the current, exhausting yourself in the effort. The true profound power of the present is not in sailing, but in dropping the anchor. When that anchor hits the seabed, the immediate now, the ship stops rocking violently. It finds a deep stability, even if the sea above remains turbulent and the surface waves continue to crash. The present moment is the quiet, stable mud beneath the waves of thought. Why is this so profoundly difficult? Because we have been conditioned culturally and emotionally to see the present as merely a bridge, a necessary, an often uncomfortable passage we must rush across to get to a better future, or from which we desperately try to retreat to a smoother past. We fear standing still in it because stillness reveals the uncomfortable truth that our suffering is often self-manufactured, constructed from elements we do not possess, the irrevocable past, or elements that do not yet exist, the contingent future. The dilemma, the great Stoic tension, is this. You cannot control the universe, yet you stubbornly assume control over the one thing you are guaranteed, the sheer sensation of being here, now. This act of resistance is the trap. Look at your current state, lying here, perhaps restless in the dark. You are likely fighting the simple physical fact that you are simply lying here. You are waiting for sleep to happen, treating the present moment of rest as a failure because the desired future state, unconsciousness, has not arrived. You are treating the stillness itself as an obstacle course to be completed. Stop treating the immediate reality as temporary. If you accept that, for this hour, your sole action is breathing, waiting, and observing, the intense pressure to perform dissipates. The present is not merely a waiting room for sleep, it is the entire experience. Breathe into it. Let the restlessness be simply another feature of the moment, like the temperature of the room or the distant sound of traffic. This radical shift in perspective defines true Stoic freedom. Freedom is never the ability to change external circumstances. The political environment, the fluctuations of the market, the demands of your job, or the timing of sleep. Freedom is the quiet recognition that the present moment is untouchable by those external forces. It is the sanctuary of your judgment. When you fully occupy the present, accepting its limitations and its total reality, the tyranny of expectation breaks. You are free from the weight of anticipation and the burden of history. You are simply being. In this pure state of being, there is no requirement to perform, no standard left to meet, and therefore no place left to escape to. The greatest escape we can ever achieve is the total immersion in the space we currently inhabit. Rest not in the elusive promise of tomorrow, but in the absolute secure reality of this instant. The present moment is not your prison, it is the escape vehicle you have been waiting for. Embracing the void between thoughts. The necessary silence. Finding the space before I judge. If the mind is a storm, what happens when you decide not to witness it? The task tonight is not about forcing cessation. It is not about stopping thinking, which is itself a violent form of thought. It is about waiting for the necessary silence to stop chasing you, allowing the natural space to appear. We are going to embrace the void between thoughts. This void is not emptiness. It is the fundamental space of non-reaction, the purest definition of personal sovereignty offered by the Stoics. It is the instantaneous boundary between stimulus and your chosen response, the sliver of time where the world presents a narrative, but you have not yet agreed to read it aloud. In the deepest sense, the void is the only place where true freedom resides because it is the only place untouched by external circumstance. Everything outside of that void, every opinion, every judgment, every worried projection about tomorrow is merely baggage handed to you by the outside world or by the reflexive machinery of your own biology. Picture your consciousness not as a flowing river, but as a vast ancient coastline. Your thoughts, your anxieties, your endless to-do list, these are the relentless crashing waves. They are loud, repetitive, and entirely surface-level chaos. If you stand too close, you are soaked, exhausted by the spray, and overwhelmed by the noise of the immediate shore. The void, however, is the deep, dark ocean floor. It is untouched by the weather above, perfectly still, immense in its indifference to the surface churn. Yet tonight you are not asked to drain the ocean, you are simply asked to sink below the line of the surface waves. You are asked to let your awareness drop into the quiet, heavy pressure of the deep, where the waves are entirely irrelevant. The central paradox of our human experience is this: we fear stillness because we fear what we will not be thinking about. We equate being busy with being valuable, and we equate the absence of noise with the threat of existential irrelevance. So, when we attempt to find silence, the greatest noise we create is the internal struggle, the critic that insists, "I should be stiller," or "I am failing at meditation." This forced effort is the opposite of the void. It's the ego trying to organize a riot. The actual mechanism for accessing the void is passive acceptance. A thought arises, say, as an anxious memory about a conversation tomorrow. That thought is a notification banner popping up on a screen. The crucial decision happens in the 2-second gap before you click open and engage the internal dialogue. The void is the refusal to click. You see the notification. You register its existence, and then you let the banner fade back into the darkness of the screen. You do not try to erase the thought, you merely decline the conversation it is trying to start. This principle is immediately applicable to the relentless demands of modern life. We live in an environment optimized to instantly fill every available space of non-thought. The urge to check the phone while waiting in line, the need for background noise, the fear of the few seconds between meetings, these are micro escapes from the void. But if you practice letting that thought, that urge, that notification simply exist without immediate engagement, you realize you have gained a moment of enormous power. The world can knock, but you retain the right not to open the door. Philosophically and psychologically, this shift changes your relationship with identity itself. If you are defined by the thoughts you harbor and the judgments you make, then when you successfully observe the void, you realize that you are not the content that passes through. You are the empty vessel. You become the containing awareness, vast and immovable, rather than the small, frantic thoughts contained within. This distinction is the engine of Stoic resilience. If the void is your foundation, nothing external, no insult, no loss, no failure can touch the foundation, because those events are merely surface waves that dissolve instantly in the deep pressure of non-judgment. The moment you cease fighting the chaos is the moment the chaos loses its energy. It's like setting down a very heavy, uncomfortable package that you didn't even realize you were carrying. Tonight, let the anchor drop. Do not chase sleep and do not chase silence. Simply observe the distance between the waves and rest in the necessary, vast indifference you find there. You are not the things that pass through you. You are the stillness that allows passage. Find the deep, silent bottom of the ocean and rest there. The virtue of necessary surrender. The concept we wrestle with tonight is the virtue of necessary surrender. It sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Virtue is usually associated with effort, struggle, and conquest, the assertion of will against friction. Surrender, conversely, implies defeat, a resignation of power. But in the quiet hours, when the world demands nothing and yet your mind is demanding everything, we find that the greatest, most active strength lies in a precise, strategic retreat. This necessary surrender is not an absence of will. It is the deployment of will towards the only territory where it holds absolute jurisdiction, your inner world. How often do you find yourself resisting the things you cannot fundamentally change? Notice the tension this resistance creates, the persistent ache associated with fighting the past conversations, the immovable reality of the current political landscape, the persistent need for the future to conform precisely to your expectation. This futile opposition generates a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety vibrating just beneath the surface of your peace. Tonight, let's explore the strategic act of releasing the tiller, not because you are too weak to steer, but because you are wise enough to identify the unnavigable waters. It is the realization that often, the highest form of effort is simply ceasing resistance. To the Stoic, and particularly to Marcus Aurelius writing in his tent, surrender is not a passive shrug. It is the active, precise classification of external reality. It is the moment you draw a sharp, your clean line around your prohairesis, your faculty of choice, and declare everything outside of that circle as none of my business. This is the foundational context of necessary surrender. You are not giving up on the pursuit of a good life. You are giving up on the illusion that you must micromanage the entire cosmos simply to maintain your inner equilibrium. You stop striving to rearrange the chess pieces that belong to fate. Imagine yourself standing on the shore, watching the tide roll in. You can expend all your finite energy trying to halt the relentless incoming waves with your bare hands, shouting at the ocean to retreat, only to be exhausted, frustrated, and ultimately soaked. Or you can activate the virtue of necessary surrender by stepping back just enough to acknowledge the tide's inevitable rhythm. That you recognize the power of the water, and you recognize that your only true control is where you choose to stand and how you choose to respond to the spray. The surrender is simply recognizing that the force of the wave is an external, and your agitated judgment of the wave is an internal. The virtue is found in the wisdom to know the difference. The paradox inherent in this mechanism is that true control is achieved only when you stop trying to control everything. Our default response to friction is tension. We encounter difficulty and we press harder, confusing sheer effort with real effectiveness. But the great teachers remind us that we are often fighting battles that finished long ago, or future battles that haven't even begun. Necessary surrender interrupts this relentless mechanism of engagement. It introduces a pause, a forcing you to ask, is this specific resistance serving my highest good, or is it merely draining the finite reserves of my attention and peace? The necessary surrender is the shift from the anxious demand, "What must I do to fix this?" to the calm inquiry, "What must I accept about this?" Apply this principle now to the silence and the wakefulness around you. If you are waiting for sleep, trying to command rest to appear on demand, you are fighting the tide. The mental resistance to wakefulness paradoxically amplifies the very state you are trying to escape. The surrender, the necessary surrender, is the moment you stop demanding sleep and start accepting the state of waiting. You acknowledge the hour, you acknowledge the persistent thoughts, but you refuse to engage them as urgent problems requiring immediate, muscular solution. You declare the simple, undeniable truth: I am awake right now, and that is permissible. My peace does not depend on the immediate arrival of sleep or the resolution of every floating thought. The psychological impact of this strategic surrender is profound. It is pure liberation. When you stop fighting the circumstances, the energy previously spent on resistance becomes immediately available for clarity and present awareness. This is where tranquility truly resides, not in the perfect alignment of external events, but in the perfect alignment of your judgment with necessity. It strips away the anxiety rooted in false responsibility. You are not responsible for the past, the global economy, the decisions of others, or even the immediate functioning of your own body chemistry. You are only responsible for the integrity and quality of your inner self right now, in this moment of quiet. The virtue of necessary surrender is the power gained from recognizing your boundary and asserting your limit. It is the conscious choice to release the things that were never truly yours to hold in the first place. You are not weaker for letting go. You are simply defining your true sovereign domain. Rest now in the strength of what you have chosen to stop resisting. Let the world outside be as it is, and find your stable calm in the center of its immutable motion. Surrender the urgency. Embrace the allowance. When rest is a battle, not a gift. The tyranny of intended rest. You are lying in the dark, and the silence of the room is no longer an invitation to calm, but an echo chamber for your unmet expectations. The pillow feels less like a cushion and more like a stage, and you are the reluctant performer unable to deliver the single act required, falling asleep. The more desperately you chase that cessation of consciousness, the louder your internal dialogue becomes. You feel the slow, painful rhythm of disappointment building in your chest, because rest, which should be a gift freely received, has become a mandatory battle you are failing to win. Have you ever considered that your failure to acquire sleep is rooted precisely in the intense effort you expend trying to succeed? Guys, this is the central paradox faced by anyone lying awake in the small hours. The Stoics understood that striving for outcomes we cannot guarantee, like immediate restorative sleep, is a fundamental source of suffering. Sleep is, by its nature, an unintended consequence of ceasing to strive. It is an act of letting go, not an act of will. Yet we treat sleep like a project plan, checking off rituals and schedules, only to find that true repose remains firmly outside the circle of our control. Imagine you are standing on the shore, attempting to hold back the tide. Or, perhaps more accurately, imagine you are holding a handful of fine, dry sand representing rest. The harder you clench your fist, the more aggressively you try to retain that rest, the faster the tiny grains sift through your fingers, lost to the current. True rest, and like that sand, requires an open, relaxed palm, a state of non-resistance, not forceful capture. Your body may be perfectly ready for slumber, your muscles relaxed, your breath slowed, but your consciousness has assigned a moral weight to the task. The inner narrative screams, "If I don't sleep now, I will fail tomorrow. I will be sluggish, inefficient, compromised." This high-stakes assignment turns a simple biological function into a performance review, judged minute by minute by the relentless clock ticking somewhere in the hallway or in the very hollow of your ear. You are fighting the clock, you are fighting the silence, and worst of all, you are fighting your own consciousness for refusing to shut down on command. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that the obstacle is the way. The battle is not with the external darkness, nor with the lack of sleep, but with the demanding editor within, criticizing your failure of repose. We must learn to distinguish between the things we control, our judgment, our response, and the things we do not, the arrival of sleep. When you are lying awake, the only thing truly within your sphere of influence is your judgment regarding that wakefulness. In the modern world, this pressure is amplified by the pervasive culture of optimization. We are expected to optimize our waking hours for productivity, and terrifyingly, we now attempt to optimize our downtime as well. We track our cycles, analyze our deep sleep percentages, and quantify rest. This quantification removes the surrender, the sheer, necessary abandonment, essential for slumber. We are trying to produce rest, rather than simply allow the state of rest to arrive when it sees fit. The psychological impact of this realization is profound. The moment you surrender the outcome, when you stop waiting for sleep and start simply being in the dark, you steal back your peace. This time of non-doing, which your productive mind feared was wasted and inefficient, becomes your most crucial philosophical training ground. It is the purest moment of Stoic practice, maintaining internal composure and dignity, regardless of whether the desired external condition, sleep, is met. You may not acquire rest, but you will acquire acceptance, and that is a far more durable shield for the day ahead. The ultimate victory here is not the forced arrival of sleep, but the profound, quiet acceptance of the wide, silent interval before it. And may your resistance to the night dissolve into the dark, and may you find rest not in the unconsciousness you seek, but in the composure you choose. The self-imposed chains of expectation. We are drifting now, sinking past the superficial worries of the day, moving toward the deeper currents of the self. Tonight, we look at the heaviest invisible burden you carry, the weight you willingly place upon your own spirit, the self-imposed chains of expectation. How much of your current exhaustion is spent fighting battles that haven't even been declared? How much tension resides in your shoulders because you are holding a rigid blueprint for a future that has no obligation to adhere to your design? We often confuse expectation with motivation. Motivation is the engine of effort. Expectation is the insistence on a predetermined destination, regardless of the road conditions. Expectation, in the philosophical sense, yet is not merely looking forward to something pleasant. It is the silent, internal contract you try to force upon an indifferent universe, a demand that reality conform precisely to your hopes, your planning, and your schedule. Marcus Aurelius, in the quiet desperation of his own office, understood that to tie your tranquility to an uncontrollable external event is to surrender your power before the event even arrives. The moment you declare that your happiness is conditional, only if this job works out, only if that relationship progresses perfectly, only if I achieve this specific milestone by this specific date, you have built your peace upon quicksand. Imagine you are sitting by the shore, having spent hours constructing a magnificent, intricate sandcastle. Your expectation is that the tide will somehow respect the walls you built, and that the ocean will recognize the effort you invested. When the inevitable wave arrives, the true suffering is not caused by the moving water. The pain is caused by the sudden, violent rupture between your rigid expectation and the immutable nature of the tide. The expectation built the fragility, the reality simply exposed it. The cruel irony of expectation is that we construct it seeking control. We believe that by firmly asserting what must happen, we gain psychological insurance against chaos, but it functions oppositely. The more defined the expectation, the more vulnerable the spirit becomes. We spend immense energy ensuring an uncontrollable future, draining the reserves we desperately need for the only thing we can truly influence, the controllable present. This is the great paradox. We suffer twice. Once in the tense anticipation of whether the expectation will be met, and again in the crushing disappointment when reality inevitably deviates. We trade flexibility for rigidity, mistaking stubbornness for preparedness. Look at the pressure points in your modern life. Are you carrying the expectation that every effort must yield immediate, quantifiable reward? Are you expecting your relationships to deliver perpetual, effortless emotional synergy? Are you carrying the silent, crushing expectation that you should always be productive, always improving, always happy? This insistence on linear, predictable progress is the most effective modern chain. When the messy, chaotic, and often unfair world refuses this transaction, we feel victimized. We forget that the universe never signed the contract we wrote for it. And the solution is not to become passive or cynical, it is to become adaptable. True freedom begins the moment you consciously convert expectation into preference. An expectation says, I demand this outcome, and if I do not receive it, my peace will be shattered. A preference says, I desire this outcome and I will work diligently for it, but if circumstances dictate otherwise, I possess the inner resources to adjust and find peace anyway. The shift is subtle, but its impact is foundational. It moves the goalposts of your happiness from the uncontrollable terrain of the external future to the controllable territory of your own response and effort. When you drop the chain of expectation, you are not surrendering effort. You are simply surrendering the need for cosmic guarantee. You are accepting the only guarantee that truly matters, your capacity to meet whatever comes next. Release the required outcome. Let the effort itself be the reward, sufficient unto the day. The moment you stop insisting the world be predictable, you make space for the only predictable thing that matters, the deep, unshakable resilience waiting at the center of your own quiet mind. Allow that truth to settle. The chains are broken, not by force, but by a simple, quiet realization. You are free. Sleep as the ultimate Stoic practice. Sleep, the unbidden internship in death. You spend a third of your life unconscious, utterly defenseless, stripped of all identity, purpose, and pretense. Doesn't that sound terrifying? To willingly enter a state of total vulnerability, where the careful structure of your ego simply dissolves? Or is it perhaps the most profound spiritual vacation you can take? The one space where the demands of the world finally hold no jurisdiction over you? The Stoics understood that true freedom lies in the acceptance of limits. We often apply this logic to external pressures, to pain, loss, insult, or public opinion. But the purest, most unavoidable limit is the physical necessity of sleep. Sleep is the daily enforced meditation on Epictetus's dichotomy of control. Yet when your body demands rest, you cannot will yourself into vigilance. You can only create the conditions for rest and then surrender to the subsequent process. When you lie down tonight, you cease to be the architect of your day, the problem solver, the self-defined personality that strives and suffers. For a critical number of hours, you become simply matter waiting for renewal, entirely trusting the mysterious mechanisms that sustain life beneath the surface of consciousness. This mandatory cessation is the ultimate test of your philosophical grounding. If you fear the loss of control implicit in sleep, you fear nature itself. Consider sleep not merely as recovery, but as a nightly rehearsal for your final departure. Every evening, you practice a gentle, temporary passing away. Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations, famously wrestled with the thought of waking up to duty, but even he knew that the ultimate duty was accepting the cessation of control, the necessary halt to the work of the rational mind. Imagine your consciousness as a great ship. Throughout the day, you are the captain, steering through the harsh waves of immediate decisions and anxieties. When the hour of sleep arrives, the Stoic captain steps away from the wheel. They lock the cabin, shut down the navigational systems, and consciously relinquish command. The ship must drift correctly through the dark passage until morning, guided not by your deliberate effort, but by the quiet, underlying current of the cosmos. You must trust the ocean. The anxiety of insomnia is fundamentally the ego fighting this mandatory surrender. It's the last stubborn gasp of the self that insists, I must remain vigilant. I must watch the gates. If I stop, something terrible will happen. This tension is the core existential paradox of sleep. We seek rest, but fear the requirement that we must become nothing in order to achieve it. The Stoic insight resolves this conflict. If you cannot handle the temporary death of sleep, how will you handle the final cessation? The struggle with insomnia is a microcosmic battle against fate itself. But peace arrives the moment you recognize that the loss of control during sleep is not a vulnerability. It is a profound and necessary function of nature. It's the ultimate form of a diaphora or indifference to external or internal worried events. In our hyper-productive 24/7 culture, sleep is framed as an inefficiency, a weakness to be minimized with caffeine and artificial light. And we dread the dark, quiet space where our communication devices are useless and our to-do list evaporates. But the quality of your waking life is entirely dependent on your commitment to this surrender. When you resist sleep, you are resisting your own human nature. When you accept it, you reclaim a fundamental dignity, the right to simply cease doing and just be. Embracing sleep as a Stoic discipline fundamentally transforms your relationship with mortality. If you can routinely practice letting go of your conscious striving self, if you can welcome that daily necessary oblivion, then the ultimate oblivion loses some of its absolute terror. It shifts from being an abrupt end to being merely the deepest, most permanent version of the rest you already know. You learn that your true essence is not defined by your achievements or your anxieties, but in the underlying flow of existence that continues, even when you are entirely unaware of it. Lay down tonight and understand this truth. Sleep is the purest act of faith in the cosmos. It is the nightly reminder that you are not the sun, but the moon, destined to vanish completely, only to return, renewed by the darkness. Dying before you die, the practice of lying still. We are here to explore the concept of mors certa, hora incerta. Death is certain, the hour is not, filtered through the lens of voluntary surrender. This is the paradoxical training we call dying before you die, the practice of lying still. It is the deepest exercise in Stoicism you can attempt, performed right here, in the quiet, horizontal waiting room of sleep. How much of your current restlessness, your anxiety, or the insistent noise of your internal monologue stems from the sheer primal refusal to accept that you are finite? The restless turning in the dark is not simply a biological fight against sleeplessness. It is, philosophically speaking, a miniature rebellion against ultimate permanent stillness. What if the most profound act of life, the act that grants real peace, is to briefly voluntarily suspend it? The Stoics formalize this with premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. But let us reframe it. This is not a morbid dwelling on sorrow, it is preventative spiritual medicine. It is the voluntary mental rehearsal of loss, pain, and ultimately cessation. When you lie here, paralyzed by the expansive, quiet gap between the day that has passed and the night that refuses to come, you are experiencing a small, safe simulation of total resignation. Your body is still, and your mind struggles to catch up. This tension is essential training. Imagine you are not simply trying to fall asleep, but rather consciously preparing for a journey from which you cannot bring back luggage, a journey that demands absolute detachment. Yet your hands are empty, your schedule wiped clean, your identity temporarily revoked. You are moving toward an invisible horizon where every attachment must be severed. This profound stillness, this horizontal resignation, is the rehearsal stage. You are actively shedding roles. Right now, you are not the successful professional, the parent, the ambitious striver, or the worried planner. You are merely consciousness suspended, a single, flickering candle flame waiting patiently for the inevitable draft that will extinguish it. This awareness, this acceptance of immediate suspension, is the core of the practice. The paradox inherent in lying still is this: the harder you fight the stillness, the more agitated and restless your mind becomes. You cling to the illusion of control, even over the autonomous functions of your body and the timing of your rest. Yet, cessation, the final stillness, is the ultimate loss of agency. Lying still in the dark, resisting the urge to check the clock, resisting the minor physical itch, resisting the urgent thoughts that demand your engagement. This is training in letting go of control, one shallow, gentle breath at a time. This deliberate stillness is not passive surrender. It is a fiercely active philosophical practice. It strips away the layers of self-importance, fear, and desire until only the essential truth remains. You are perishable, and that is perfectly acceptable. The tension dissolves when you realize the vulnerability required to accept stillness is the very strength that protects you from the paralyzing fear of life. In the modern, hyper-optimized world, while we view downtime as a productivity failure, an inefficiency, we dread the void. We fill every pause with noise, scrolling, or preemptive planning. Lying in the dark, truly still, is thus an act of countercultural bravery. It forces you to confront the one reality our society desperately tries to insulate you from: profound silence and total cessation. When you recognize that the worst thing you can imagine, your own non-existence, is already mentally survivable because you rehearsed it tonight, then the petty, insistent fears of the morning, the email, the deadline, the confrontation, lose their paralyzing power. What fundamentally shifts within you is your relationship to present time. When you successfully face your own ultimate horizon, the small, immediate moments of your current existence gain immense weight and texture. Yet you are no longer desperately living for tomorrow, you are living entirely in this suspended moment. This practice of lying still and mentally dying before you die grants you a profound, resilient freedom. It detoxifies regret about the past and defangs apprehension about the future. The self that eventually rises tomorrow, having experienced this profound, temporary death, will be leaner, sharper, and deeply appreciative of the temporary gift of breath. It is the ultimate acceptance of the present tense. Allow the sheer weight of your body to settle into the bed beneath you. Feel the pull of gravity, an ancient stabilizing force reminding you of your complete and humble connection to the earth. Tonight, in this deliberate stillness, you are practicing the perfect final surrender. And when you practice the final surrender well, you earn the right to wake up and live again, truly free from unnecessary struggle. Lying still is the hardest work because it prepares you for rest eternal, yet gives you the enduring strength to manage everything else. Why resistance is the longest hour. The perception of duration is not a fixed feature of time itself, but a direct measurement of the friction you create against it. This is why resistance, particularly the internal kind, always feels like the longest hour. You know this hour intimately. It is not the period of active physical struggle, but the time spent actively bracing. It is the psychic interval that separates the conscious realization of a difficult truth from the final, necessary acceptance of it. You are not fighting the external world during this hour. You are fighting the necessary shift in your own worldview. Resistance, in the deep Stoic sense, is the ego's futile attempt to veto the inevitable. It is the belief that if you push hard enough against the current reality, reality might somehow concede and conform to your preference. We spend vast reserves of emotional energy trying to negotiate with the past, or trying to hurry the future. Marcus Aurelius understood that suffering rarely originates from the thing that happens, but from the judgment we layer onto the thing. That layer of judgment, that emphatic declaration that this should not be, is the heavy blanket that muffles the clock, making every second stretch and groan. Imagine you are standing at the base of a sheer cliff, needing to ascend. The climb itself will take 3 hours, but instead of focusing on the handholds, you spend the first hour angrily calculating why the cliff should have been a gentle slope, or why you shouldn't have been obligated to climb it at all. The 3 hours of actual physical effort are exhausting, yes, but the first hour of mental opposition is debilitating. That hour, the one dedicated solely to resisting the fact of the obstacle, is subjectively longer and far more draining than the 2 hours of focused action that follow. This is the central paradox. Resistance does not stop the progression of time. It only successfully slows down your subjective experience of it. The longer you fight the external reality, the more time you spend living in a state of dissonance, and dissonance is fundamentally tiring. We are not resisting the outcome. We are resisting the feeling of being momentarily powerless over the outcome. And that resistance demands constant, vigilant maintenance. It requires the energy of confrontation without the benefit of resolution. Think about the moment right now, perhaps waiting for the natural onset of sleep. That is, the biological need is simple rest. The resistance comes not from the darkness or the quiet, but from the impatient demand for immediate unconsciousness. You lie there, analyzing the silence, calculating how many hours of rest you have left, worrying about the consequence of not having enough. That calculation, that urgent, anxious desire to skip ahead of the timeline, is the most powerful fuel for wakefulness. We apply this resistance everywhere in modern life, waiting for a critical email that determines your next move, stuck motionless in traffic while a deadline approaches, anticipating a difficult and unavoidable conversation. We don't just wait, we suffer the act of waiting. We become obsessed with the distance to the destination, failing to see the immediate terrain beneath our feet. When you cease the resistance, you do not surrender your agency, you purify it, you accept the external time frame as fixed, the wait is the wait, the outcome is the outcome, and you reclaim your internal time frame as fluid and controllable. This is why acceptance is not passive resignation. It is the most aggressive form of internal efficiency. It is the shortest, cleanest path between the realization of a problem and its final resolution. To be at peace is not to live in a world without problems, but to live in a world where you do not spend energy arguing with the reality of those problems. You stop adding the unnecessary weight of self-inflicted friction. Stop measuring the subjective distance to the destination. Start inhabiting the simple, quiet reality of the moment beneath your feet. Yet the longest hour is only long because you keep insisting it should have been shorter. Real time moves at the same pace for all of us, but the quiet, unprotesting acceptance of it moves with the speed of light. The imperfect calm of unfinished business. You're lying here, perhaps hoping for that perfect blank slate of mind. You might be mentally reviewing the day's ledger, auditing your productivity, and cataloging the duties that slipped through the cracks. But tell me, have you ever actually finished everything, completely? This block explores the continuous present and the myth of completion. The Stoics understood that the universe is a mechanism of relentless becoming, not of static being. This idea, the imperfect calm, is the recognition that true tranquility is not the absence of tasks, but the acceptance of their infinite renewal. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that our duty is to the action in the present moment, not to the fantasy of checking the final box on the final list. Completion, in the absolute sense, is a divine attribute, not a human one. We are designed for participation, not for finality. Trying to achieve a state of zero unfinished business is like trying to convince the ocean to stop moving. Imagine yourself standing on the shoreline of your life. You meticulously sweep the sand smooth, erasing all the footprints and debris. You stand back, admiring the perfect empty slate you have created. But the tide is already turning. The next wave, which is tomorrow, which is the next email, which is the unexpected call, is already rushing forward. It is an impossible negotiation with physics and the nature of existence itself. We mistake the desire for rest with the prerequisite of perfect order. The paradox is this: we seek quietude through achievement. But the very act of seeking total achievement ensures perpetual agitation. We have internalized the myth of the finite workload. We believe that if we just push harder, faster, smarter, the work will eventually cease. But life is not a fixed-length project. It is continuous maintenance, a steady stream of inputs and outputs. The tension you feel right now, that little whisper cataloging everything you need to do tomorrow, is not a failure of organization. It is the ego's resistance to the reality that we are designed to be participants, not finishers. We are defined by movement, growth, and reaction. If you finished everything, what would you be? Stagnant. Complete is often another word for inert. The anxiety you feel fades when we realize the work will never be done, but our current task can be done, ethically and fully. And then we are free to choose the next pause. We often treat our to-do list like a boundary marker that prohibits rest. We tell ourselves, I cannot truly relax until I cross this line of completion. This self-imposed tyranny is exhausting because the line keeps moving. Look at your digital life. The tabs are never truly closed. The notification count hovers, ready to reappear the instant you open the application. In the modern world, unfinished business isn't just a list. It's an atmospheric hum, a constant static electricity surrounding our consciousness. The dread of the incomplete doesn't come from the task itself, but from the judgment we attach to resting while the list still breathes. We feel guilty for seeking sleep because sleep implies a temporary surrender of control and a pause in the endless war against the inbox and the next deadline. We fear that by pausing, we are inviting chaos. But chaos is already here, and it is natural. What changes when we embrace the imperfect calm? We stop viewing completion as the gateway to happiness and start viewing consistent application as the reward itself. The goal shifts from reaching the mountaintop, which only reveals 1,000 new mountains, to mastering the quality of the step you are taking right now. This philosophical shift is profound. If the work is infinite, then the only rational approach is to decide where we draw the temporary boundary of the day, and to honor that boundary, knowing the tide will inevitably return tomorrow. You have done enough for today's duty, and because you have done what was possible within the scope of your control and your energy, allow the remaining threads of the day to float. They are not mistakes or failures. They are simply proof of continuity, evidence that your participation in life is active and ongoing. Sleep not because the list is done, but because you have chosen, deliberately and mindfully, that this is where the work pauses. The true calm is found not in the stillness of the destination, but in the steady, gentle rhythm of the journey itself. If you reach this far, you're one of the few who stayed conscious until the end. Write, "I know the secret" in the comments, and share this reflection forward.